Ryan Balch, welcome to the How Humans Work podcast.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. I appreciate you having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I'm excited to have a conversation today and explore the science of social connections with you
Great. Great.
because that's your field. That's where you're hanging out and doing work. So let's just get into it. And what I'd love to know are what are the challenges and hazards that we have in our sociality? Like what are the landmines in our social nature that we seem to be struggling with pretty strongly right now?
Well, there's two things that really come to mind when you say that. I think it's a great question. And the first is just like what our situation is, our social situation. And and I think in a lot of ways we've got higher levels of isolation across a lot of different categories, whether we talk about racial segregation, whether we talk about economic segregation, and we can also even more recently talk about political isolation, um, where you have 98 to 99% of Americans that are living in areas that are segregated by partisanship. And in general, like you think about like the average American will come across like 70% of the people they come across in their day to day are going to have the same political orientation. And so you've got this set of isolation, this situation that happens. But then you've also got a lot of like internal pieces that the humans struggle with too, with things like, in group, out group categorization that just really reinforces, when we're in isolation, we're seeing people as the other and some of that internal nature of categorization, but also we'll probably talk a lot about like the idea of protection, self-protection as well. And like what happens when things like identity and safety are challenged by others and how we react to that.
So you use the word segregation, which is a pretty loaded word in American society with our history.
Yeah.
How do you understand it as an academic? Like, what do you actually mean in there? And I think it's closer to siloed, or maybe there's a deeper understanding of the word than a common association with American history.
I think about it more in a geographic sense. So
Okay.
how much, where do you live? What neighborhood are you living in? What kind of contact and mix of any kind of identity you're talking about, whether it be economic, whether you talk about racial, whether you talk about political, what is the what is the balance within a neighborhood, within a town? How many people of different sources of identity live within a reasonable range where you would have normal contact.
Yeah, great. Super helpful. And so there's both the outer struggle of our situation and what we're living
Yeah.
amongst, as I think I hear you saying, and then there's an internal situation of how in group out group behaviors are experienced by people as maybe more isolating.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And it's that combination. It's really when we have things that are around us that interact with things within inside of us that really, comes together and produces those behaviors.
Yeah. So are there any other hazards in our sociality that are at play besides those two facets that you're talking about?
Yeah. Um, I would say, in a lot of ways, I think our nature of wanting to be seen in certain lights really gets in the way of it. Like we want to be perceived as competent, we want to be perceived as thoughtful. There's a lot of these underlying needs that we have for recognition and like control over one's life.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we communicate that sometimes might come across in, say, like a political policy statement. I believe X about, say, gun control or things like that. But like really what we're talking about is these underlying needs, and we just really struggle with the communication of like,
Yeah.
I believe this, but I'm actually talking about a whole different thing than what you might be talking about.
So there's a disconnect in terms of communication, but I also really love this thought because of the kind of healing work that I do and the interest I have, that the interior needs for social meaning and social affiliation or connection or belonging, simple word, get confused with outer statements of policy. And
Yeah.
so we see outer surface identities, I think is what you're saying, of a political position that might help us feel like we're in an in group. but the motivational system is less registered in people's awareness. They're less in touch with, inside this actually is a human need for belonging that I'm expressing in this social
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
social position or this social orientation.
Yes. Yeah. And if you look at it, I mean, you might look at security, like if we take that idea of gun control, somebody might be saying, I want to have both control over my life. I also want to have a sense of safety. And like you're threatening of that. You might talk about like, well, hey, we're talking about background checks. But in reality, like when I communicate that I don't believe in background checks or I do, I'm really talking about, this underlying fear and safety. I'm just not able to articulate necessarily that this is an emotional need that is informing my perspective. And so we sometimes have these conversations where you feel like you're having these two different types of conversation. Like one is having a practical conversation about what do I believe about background checks? And one is really having an emotional conversation about what do I feel about my own sense of control, my own sense of security, but it comes out in these other words, and you just have ships passing in the night.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's familiar. And I feel like I've seen and registered those kind of disconnects. So you have someone who's at a logical level talking about policy and impact,
Yeah,
and another person who's working with their identity structure, and that doesn't really connect or work. So we have like a siloed reality. We have a disconnect between what people are actually talking about, whether it's an outer social policy or an inner social need.
yeah,
And then we
yeah,
have an intense kind of in-group, out-group isolationism that's going on.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a perfect mix of like the recipe for us to not be able to have, like you talk about what does cohesion look like? Like those are the recipes that are all all the ingredients are just like providing the foundation for disconnect.
Wow. That's difficult.
It is.
Yeah. And I think we know it. I think we see it and know it in our experience. I'm kind of curious too that some of it's like what I notice in certain political positions is an adherence to the group as much as it is to safety. And so sometimes like people are speaking from, yeah, I feel safer, let's say if I have a gun and I have these gun rights, and it's a very personal need, but sometimes it's a group identity, is it not? And it's like I don't want to question my group identity, and I want to stick with what my in group norms and who I'm hanging out with says and thinks.
But I might connect that both to what we were talking about with an underlying need, where if I might even understand or connect with or even support your perspective, the consequences of me holding a different position is really going to be come at the expense of like my sense of belonging to my community, which I still would say is an underlying need. And like, you're talking about, well, if you like your position makes sense, but I can't change that because, you know, changing that perspective will harm that community. And then there's the second piece where, I think that a lot of there's differences in like how much like cognitive effort people are putting towards certain positions, right? You've probably
Uh-huh.
heard of, Kahneman's like system one, system two framework of like we apply system one kind of automatic thinking to the majority of our decisions and a majority of, in our conversations as well. And so it might be that you just haven't really necessarily wanted to allocate the cognitive effort towards that thought and you go with the default statement, which is what does my leader think? What does my community think? Where you haven't really gone and done all the research. It's just like I'm going to go with that automatic type of answer. So, and I think it's like all of these different pieces we're talking about. I think it's helpful to understand where the default is. So I think sometimes we're surprised by disconnect and surprised when it's having difficult conversations and we're not able to get as much progress. And I think that's like that surprise, I would say, makes us shy away from it.
Yeah.
And I think if we can just manage and set better expectations to be like, here are the default settings of like, we're going to categorize. We don't have, kind of a lot of contact. We have all these ingredients happening. So we have to recognize like that's where we start, and that's okay. It's not inevitable. It's not impossible to overcome, but I think it is the default, and we're surprised that we wish for the default to be something different than it is.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the default.
Yeah.
Because, and I think that's part of making peace with human nature and making peace
Yes.
with the story of, what our complexes are as humans. So you talked about categorization as one of the
Yeah.
defaults. You talked about energy conservation essentially as
Yeah.
another default mode. And then system one is the default,
Yes.
easiest, most accessible, automated circuitry.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me more.
I think you can talk about like why social groups have, formed in this way in which, you need to allocate your decisions, your effort and decisions to ones that have like higher consequences. And so it does make sense. Like we couldn't sit and think and debate, where we're gonna sit in a room or where we're, our directions to work. Like we would be left exhausted and
Yeah.
unable to really apply it when we need. So our default setting is to kind of go with automatic reactions, to go with something. So it has this nature that makes sense, except for I would say the default nature was created in a different environment than we're in today. And so at this point, categorization for the purpose of avoiding, being eaten or, harmful plants or things like that, we now apply those to people. And the consequences of that categorization and overgeneralization, we're seeing in this kind of really highly social world with way more differences, in terms of categorizations that we're having to navigate, is that we can't just go with that default mode. We have to be able to apply effort to change it.
Yeah, no, it's I get that. It makes sense to me. And I'm also thinking about the stress of population and the stress of differences and the stress of volume of social decisions to manage. And it's a high load to kind of process as many people who come into my environment, right? And so what I kind of hear is categories can be both a defense and a helpful tool, but they have inherent problems.
We have to get better at understanding where we need to allocate effort. And specifically when it comes about judgments about people, judgments about ideas, judgments about even like political statements and things like that, or policy things, that's where we need to be able to understand, like, yeah, the answer is not just apply system two effort all the time. It's impractical. And so it's about understanding situations where we get it wrong, specifically in social relationships.
Okay, deepen us into that understanding and the advocacy you're making right now. What's an example of, okay, I can't go system two because I can't be there, but yet I'm stuck in system one, or I'm in a categorization that's problematic and it's not working in this social relationship. I'm imagining I'm walking down the street and I see someone different for whatever background, political, whatever the signs that they're wearing in their outfit. They're a Manchester United fan instead of a Manchester City fan, whatever,
Yep.
and so what am I doing? Like, how, walk me through that in a practical skill sense. Like, how do I manage that?
Yeah. So I would say like there's specifically when we talk about people, we have to understand that particularly in visual things like the idea of wearing a t-shirt, right? Like that visual piece that comes to mind first. We have to think that this is a member of a group. That's what our categorization is. But the actual way to enter this is that this is an individual first. We do that for our own groups. When we see a member of our own group, we actually approach them first as an individual because we share group membership. And so it's recognizing this is the default. I'm going to categorize this person. And now, hang on a second. System two can intervene and say, let me find out about who this is as an individual
Yeah.
first before applying all these, characteristics I would apply universally across that group membership.
Yeah, that's nice. I'm reminded of a college teacher of mine who said that Benjamin Franklin, like he used to come to people with the attitude of "I like you," Yeah, it's kind of like that. And I'm also thinking like in this, little silly example that like, oh, we're both soccer fans, of teams in the same city. Like, is that the kind of shifting of beginning to crack open the categorization to make us more of membership? Like, hey, we're in the same membership here.
Yeah, that
Is that
is. I
what you're
mean, you're
talking about?
you're
Yeah.
you're spot on there. Where it's like if I can come in and think about what connects us,
Mhm.
like no matter what, there's going to be a connecting point, and it's like what are the pieces that connect us, and also how. Just starting with, let's get to know this individual. Let's ask some questions before assuming what characteristics they might have because of this group membership. But, and I think this comes to, what do I think about for the goals of a conversation? What do I think of my goals for interaction? Um, and, this idea of, am I trying to find out, like, I love what you said about Ben Franklin, because that's stating a goal for the interaction is I want to like this person,
Yeah.
right? Where if my default setting is like uncertainty, unknown, if I can change that goal to be, I'm going to assume best intentions, I'm going to look at this person as an individual before group membership. If I can apply some system two effort in that interaction, it's not overwhelming. It's not 24 hours a day. It's just I'm approaching a new interaction with an individual, and I can apply that, effort to overcome that default.
That's great. I love that. And so just to review again, system one thinking is what?
Quick thinking, automatic, categorizing, connecting the dots, all these type of
Instinctual
instinctual.
responses.
Mm-hmm,
I've been
mm-hmm.
here before. This is what I know. I'm going to apply past
Correct.
experiences to this situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
establishing cause and
Yeah.
say like, oh, X happened and Y happened, like
Uh-huh.
that must have been caused by it,
Yeah.
those types of
And
things.
system two then is what?
System two is more like the ability to handle multiple pieces of information at the same time. And it's the ability to see a novel situation and understand the nuances and differences. So it's able to it's really multiple pieces of information you're holding at the same time, as opposed to just that simple kind of one piece. And so it's a multitasking. So I can both say, this person has this group identity and this person is an individual, which is two bits of information I can hold at the same time, and it can apply that.
Okay. Let's say this Manchester United fan is drunk. They just lost to my team in the derby and they're coming at me aggressively.
There you go.
What do I do then? I still have to honor my system one
Correct.
defenses, right?
I think that's a little bit of a different circumstance than I mean, I think when in terms of like cohesion, there might be like, it might be able to walk away and,
Yeah.
to be like, hey,
Yeah.
this is not the situation in which you're going to be really, really heated emotionally
Yeah.
and intoxicated, that like, this may not be our moment of beauty for social cohesion, right?
Okay.
And
Great.
that's okay.
Totally.
Um,
Fight that
but
battle another day.
exactly, exactly. But I think the majority of our interactions are more so in the day to day. They have the potential to go either in this positive connection way or this default disconnection way.
I'm thinking about A Beautiful Tale, actually, by Terry Dobson, and it's a book of stories that Jack Kornfield collected, American Buddhist teacher. And it's Terry's an Aikido student on the subway or the metro in Japan, and he's like been young guys looking for his, moment to express all this training he's doing and done with his martial art, even though the essence of Aikido is using people's energy in a loving way. And right when this drunk guy gets on and is belligerent, about to be danger, and this Terry's about to, puff up and have his moment, this old Japanese man says, "Hey, what are you drinking?" And the contact point of that moment of the old man, who's obviously can see, and pretty soon the story ends where the guy's weeping on his lap about how nobody loves him and his wife had left him.
Yes.
And yes. So I feel that goosebumps. So I'm just bringing that in because I brought in the imaginary, moment of
No, I love
rival
it. I love
fans.
it. Yeah. I mean, it comes back to that, like, what are they feeling underneath, right? That other things are driving this kind of surface level behavior. So
that's right.
It does
That's
connect.
right. Mm-hmm. That's right. We have Benjamin Franklin and the old Japanese man who can establish goal states in connection, But before we go further in the how to establish goal states, I want to stick more with the defenses of categorization. And I think most people experience categorization as the critic, the judgmental mental experience. And a lot of people suffer. I've suffered with that. And most people, I think, suffer with the categorization voices of establishing differences, establishing safety, whether it's outward towards other people and they're like, why was I that way? Or inward towards myself and maybe voices that would treat myself in a self critical way that I would never say out loud anybody on a social street because there's no decorum to it. And so help us build a deeper sense of this hazard system one default mode of protection, categorization / critic. If you can, I
Yeah.
don't know if you have insight on that.
So there's this activity that I do with my students. And when we talk about categorization specifically, they have to walk around class with an adjective on their forehead that they can't see. And this could be uh, any name of like adjectives you can think of, resilient or lazy or you name it. Like there's, 50 different adjectives. And they have to have these conversations with people and feel like the person, their conversation is, what do you want to do after college? What job are you hoping to do? And the other person is supposed to basically treat them like their stereotype that's sitting on their forehead. And I think I see many people who also like share the majority identity with, say, people in college or, educated, that they haven't experienced being categorized for their group membership with having nothing to do with themselves as an individual. And I do think it's that sense of empathy to be like, that's not what I want to do with others. And this is what our default is. And it gives like the so it's like knowledge of it, then also like understanding that I do this and I don't like also how it feels when it's done to me. That gives that motivational empathy towards, I think, treating people and saying, like, here's the impulses that are coming and I can hear them. And I'm going to now like use a little bit of effort to overcome it and really try to see this as an individual.
Okay, so that's a helpful tool to break down the categorization habit,
Yeah.
like give that really grounded emotional experience that the outcome of overlooking an individual is actually a form of pain and suffering because
Yeah.
of the need to be seen. Is that where we're going?
Yeah.
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 Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate you making that like through line between that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure.
Hmm.
Deep down, and my experience in the work I do with people is that
Yeah.
we don't fully see ourselves mostly. And
Yeah.
is my judgment, my experience, and that or we feel things that we don't know how to see might be another way of saying it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to stick with the hazards a little bit more because I'm so interested in human nature and obstructions and like where we're just uncomfortable with the beast we are, the nature that we've inherited and been given. So where else in the dynamics of our sociality do we and I think one of them I've seen in your work is power. So maybe aside from categorization, we can talk about power in relationship to social hazards.
People want to be seen as, somebody who I have, reasonable under like rationale for why I believe what I believe. And so I think like part of our hazard is like a need to defend who we are and like our power as an individual. Like, I believe I'm a smart, capable, thoughtful person. But then all of a sudden you come along and you present this alternative idea to me. And that threatens my sense of my sense of security, my sense of recognition, my sense of belief in myself as a thoughtful person. Because you have these two ideas of like your idea and my idea that I'm a thoughtful person, but you're presenting evidence that suggests otherwise. You have a new perspective on it. And so we've got this defense protection type of mechanism,
Mhm.
and it can really look a lot of different ways. And I think like part of it is recognizing that that is happening and saying, when you have it comes out in these kind of interesting subtle ways where these defense mechanisms where like it's actually somebody trying to take these like two different ideas, this dissonance they're feeling between these two different ideas, and reduce that anxiety they're feeling.
Uh-huh.
And it comes across as like, you might hear somebody like move the goalpost, right? Which is actually like a way of reducing dissonance because, well, you
Yeah.
believe this and I believe this and I'm a smart person and I'm feeling some like tension around these two different ideas. I need to reduce that by minimizing your belief, right? By
Yeah.
blaming
Or
somebody else.
whataboutisms, right? Whataboutisms would be
Exactly.
classic.
Which
Okay.
is blame, all right? And saying like, well, you do this type of thing, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So it makes it okay. Or it's like, then we even get into like extremes of that, of like gaslighting and like denying reality and all this stuff like that, right? But like it all, you talk about like the need to protect oneself and idea, the tension that arises when you have an idea that I'm like, oh, that actually kind of makes sense, but that arouses dissonance with like these existing ideas about me and my identity and what I've always held. And so it's like we have that default to protect. And so like when I'm engaging that conversation, I need to be able to say like, oh, you are reducing your dissonance right now. Like what's happening? Like why I need to start getting curious about like why you're feeling this, you
Yeah.
know?
So what would you say in a conversation? Let's say you and I are, debating or we're talking about an idea and, I move the goalpost or I do a whataboutism, which, some people might get reactive to, but you're offering, skill building here is, well, I'm going to just notice that and realize there's a system one protection move happening and I must be probably feeling vulnerable or loss of power or
Yes.
uncomfortable. What do you
Yes.
do? What do you say?
Well, you don't go further. Like that's the biggest thing is that you're not trying like a lot of times we'll have like goal of like being like, well, they moved the goalpost, so how about I like now try to like, you know, provide evidence that'll also deconstruct that argument. And like that actually just has the opposite effect. It's like what you've probably heard of as like the backfire effect, where it's like it actually strengthens their belief when you present some of that evidence and they feel this like need to defend and mount, right? Can attack or counterattack. And so I think there's a set of questions that really get at like if you're talking about this position and you keep changing your, moving the goalposts or trying to like deflect through blame, I need to understand like why this issue is important to you. I need to understand things about you, what your history is with this to really be able to even start connecting with you on the right level.
Uh-huh.
Um,
So what kind of
so
question would you ask someone?
I think specifics are, why is this issue important to you?
Okay.
Is one. Number two is like, tell me how you came to hold this perspective.
Okay.
Another one, which I think is probably one of my favorite and the most illuminating parts, is how has your perspective changed over time? Is this always what you believed, or has it gone up in different pathways? And like just that question, like the person that is you're speaking with, like A feels seen, you're curious about it, and like you see why things came to be the way they are, which tells you this amazing source of information about their history and their rationale and their connection to their ideas that like you start understanding. Um, and then like you can even ask about like, about their sources of information, like, hey, where have you learned about this? Like, what information are you basing this off of? Like, all of those questions are big things that lead to these really cool conversations
Mhm.
and a sense of understanding about where they're coming from.
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, you move from your one zone, like because if somebody moves the goalpost, or gets whataboutism, I might get irritated.
Yeah.
But if I can get curious
Yes.
and I can shift out of my own protectionism And so, what are things that help us move from that system one to
Yeah.
system two? Like, what are the contextual things that we need to be aware of to realize, there's a lot of these like, you know, Charlie Kirk's gone now, but these debates, of thinkers arguing over ideas and in these kind of intense public witnessed moments. Yeah, I think kind of I'm imagining those contexts actually heighten the
Mm.
need to feel protective.
Yeah, and I do think it changes I think what it does is we change the goals of the conversation. And I think there's an element of like categorization that starts it from system one. But after that, it's like this self-identity. It's like it gets into this idea of cognitive dissonance where I like feel this tension. And you know, I I think like um there's other pieces you can also like ask them to just like illuminate an openness to this. Like after you've gotten all this information, you can also be like, do you have an openness to hearing another perspective? Um, is there any evidence that would change your mind on this thing? And sometimes they'll say no. And
Yeah,
then like, cool, like this probably isn't a conversation. Like we're
yeah,
probably not gonna,
yeah,
they're literally telling you no matter what you say, it will not make a difference. So,
yeah,
but like I think part of what internally what we can do is also shifting our goals, where sometimes we have a goal to convince and sometimes we have a goal to win an argument. Like we imagine there's this debate stage that we're on with an audience that you're talking about, it's public and like who's going to score more points when like in reality, like when we actually have a conversation, if I can shift it from convincing and winning and
yeah,
internally I can just say, hey, I need to change my goal here because something's happening. So my goal needs to understand. That's it. Not convince, but understand. And it does change the mindset. And you can actually, I think in a lot of ways, like help the other person um, come off their defense as well. When like you're getting really curious, you're not counteracting. You can shift the goal with them.
yeah,
Um, and I think you probably saw that in you know, the beer commercial that I
yeah,
sent you,
yeah,
which
absolutely.
yeah. And
Uh,
for context, there's this Heineken commercial out there if people want to check it out. It's called Worlds Apart. And, you have people from very different political backgrounds and coming together. And, before they learn about their other perspective, they start having these moments of these conversations of connection.
don't they have to
And
build something first? Don't they have to like do a
they
project first?
do.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Which comes from this idea of like superordinate goals where I don't know if there's this like robbers cave experiment that back in like the 60s that they brought teenagers together and they had them in like two different camps called the rattlers and the eagles and they had so they brought them together and they had these like isolated first, they bonded separately, and they brought them together for these intense competitions. And non-surprisingly, unsurprisingly, there was conflict and fights and stealing of things. But then they created these situations where it was like, okay, now you need to pool your money to like watch a movie together. The water tank broke, and we all need to fix it together. And they had a series of they couldn't be successful unless they collaborated type of situations. And what they saw was incredible bonding among them because they had this shared goal between them. And what's interesting is that like they actually did this other version of the experiment where they started them all together and like living together and like knowing each other, and then they put them into teams, and like the whole thing didn't work. Like they couldn't create the conflict, right? Because they were like, "But this is my buddy, and I know you're trying to get me to be mad at him, but it's my friend first, right?" And like it's interesting like how I would say in previously I would say like more historically when there's like a more connection and living in the same place, then you saw more of that lack of conflict, where now with this isolation we're starting off isolated, we're coming together. So like we need this sense of like having the same goals of a conversation. And if I can really get curious and have my goal be understanding, um then like a lot of times it can lead to that matching of that goal from the other side.
Yeah. You probably don't know these things, but you're basically talking about polyvagal theory and internal family systems, which is like a whole like
Yeah,
nervous system, like health and healing view of how to shift states and
yeah,
how to relate to say system one or voices with
yeah,
curiosity and get out
yeah,
of fight or flight into a relational. They call it ventral vagal in the
yeah.
polyvagal theory.
Funny how
So
good ideas get packaged in different areas, right? Like in different ways, and we think of them as different, but it's a really that common theme.
yeah, and they hold true across systems and fields
Yes,
of knowledge because they are
yes,
implicitly somehow closer to our nature. So I'm thinking
yes.
about the organization or the story of the robbers' caves that you shared. I'm kind of assuming it's all boys and it was all boys research and it was,
Correct.
yeah, and there wasn't girls
About
involved at the
seven,
time. And
13, 14-year-old, all
yeah,
white. Like, I mean, it
yeah,
was, as what
yeah.
you
So I'm,
imagine in the 60s.
so I'm kind of curious, if you had like people of different cultural values and backgrounds, what would happen with the stories. That's a curiosity at
Yeah,
this moment, because I just did an interview with someone who works and supports uncontacted peoples across the world, the hunter-gatherer populations
gotcha.
that are still, and it's so powerful to think about the diversity of our humanity, particularly at that level. I'm
So
also
they've
thinking of, yeah, go ahead.
so there's been an underlying technique that's used in schools. It's something called jigsaw classroom. And what they do is they basically place each person in a group with like responsibility that makes the group dependent on every member. And so it's coming out of this like idea of superordinate goals and across different identities, across different academic levels, across different grades, there is incredible results about increased performance and connection between the group when this type of system is used. So across a lots of different schools, like the outcome of this creation of superordinate goals um, does cross many of the points of disconnection that you mentioned.
So thank you. So superordinate goals is basically academic speak for we have a higher purpose that we both share. Okay,
100%.
great. Okay, great.
A
Just want to make
common
sure.
enemy.
Yeah. Or a
Well, which
common
is,
common survival requirement.
yeah, yeah,
Is that
yeah.
fair?
Either one. Either
Yeah.
one.
Yep. And so, an asteroid or an alien's like we all said all humanity we're all like, "Hey, we're now in this together." Right?
Well, you'd think the pandemic might have been able to do that. And it lasted for about 2 weeks, right?
That was amazing.
Right? Everybody's in it. I think there was like commercials all over about we're in this together. And then all of a sudden, like people
Yeah.
wanted to have different goals and there was different
Yeah,
motivation and lots, we don't have
for
to
sure.
rehash all of that, but it
Yeah.
started as that.
Yeah, but that creativity, that in soulful shared creativity moment of togetherness, like wow, we're in a different
Yes.
place together. That was
Yes.
profound.
Nice.
But I'm thinking also about what you're sharing and the goals, because I think there's something here. But I want to bring up Brent McKinnon, who I
Hmm.
interviewed on the podcast, who's passed away, and he was a Vietnam veteran, combat veteran, and because he had learned some Vietnamese, he ended up in a school and in a community in a village trying to teach English and moving from combat warrior into educator and
Yeah.
community connector.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, the military had goals for him, which were related to the war, but his goals shifted, and
Yeah.
particularly when he was sick and he was in this like fever and people took care of him and put him out in the monsoon to cool him off from his fever and sang and made herbs, that radically shifted his ability to be like, yeah, I can't use this gun anymore. I can
Yeah.
never go back to using this gun. I can never hold this view of enemy on these people
Yes.
who treated me with this kind of dignity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that really resonates with I mean, I would say like that the ability to see a group by just their membership. Like well, there's all kinds of things that happens when that happens. Like we assign all members characteristics to all members. We stop seeing them as individuals. Like that's when like this dehumanization can happen, is when we stop seeing them as individuals and humans. And so like that experience shifted. It forced this personalization and seeing the ones who had helped him as individuals, which broke through that default. of I'm seeing everybody as the same. I'm seeing everybody as this group membership. And like he saw them as individuals that helped them. And it was like, oh my gosh, they're humans again, right? Instead of being dehumanized as a group, which in a lot of ways is like there's some element of that, people in battle like have to wrestle with because of, you know, I think actually in like Nazi Germany, there were like leaders that said like they had to dehumanize the people that the soldiers were killing in order to protect the soldiers, because otherwise it would have been too stressful for them. And so there's this out group derogation and dehumanization that was not able to happen. And he had to wrestle with that in that situation and like really see them as individuals, but it wasn't the default.
And the other side of it is, the military dehumanizing the soldiers along the way. And ironically, it may have been the Vietnamese who first humanized him in that environment more than anybody else, right? So it's good to think about that level. I'm also flashing to another author who wrote about his Darren Walton, who's also a local Vietnam veteran here, combat veteran, who was telling a story where he was in a foxhole, or maybe it was a friend or someone who ended up in the same hole as a North Vietnamese soldier, and they were just surviving. They just stayed there all night until it was over. They didn't kill each other. They didn't do anything. They both just walked away. And the one guy's like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Right. So there's this real, I mean, these are like life and death. These aren't like just like, a Man United fan on the street. This is like visceral reality. But I want to tie in the categorization and the goal context, because I feel like, in a way, tell me if I'm thinking about this the right way. What we're saying is that system one survival categorization is an important artifact of our evolution, but maybe more deeper system one is survival. And and that when we have a shared goal that either mimics the need for survival in a modern context or really requires survival, that's also system one in a way. I think that it's a deeper instinct that, okay, I got to drop my categorization, because that's not as protective as it is actually to align and make sure we both make it through this.
Yeah, there's
Is
like
that
different
fair?
levels of, yeah, I think different levels of protection of like this need to survive in this immediate case requires us to work together.
Yeah.
But then when I go back, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, my default normally, if I stay away from the other and stay with myself, my own group will protect me. And
Yeah.
other is unknown and has the potential for, you know, something bad to happen. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So you don't want to challenge that. You agree that survival thing is also system one.
oh, I think it went above. It's still a goal, but it's like, what's the most salient survival goal at this moment?
Yeah.
Which is like, I think that's temporary though.
Okay.
I don't think we can maintain that survival goal necessarily for all times. It's going to fall back down when it's
Uh-huh.
not an immediate
That's
threat.
interesting.
That and all of a sudden, like the categorization now outside of this immediate threat will still take the higher priority.
Got it. So in the higher states of threat,
Yeah.
maybe this deeper instinct will kick in. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
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 But it might not survive once we get back into society. We might not be friends again. I might just become the same asshole I was the whole time.
Yeah, you'll have to wrestle with it somehow. Yeah. Yep.
So, all right, let's go to this jigsaw puzzle and this shared gold state and this interdependence model, because it's kind of the out of, how do we get out of the conditionality? I also want to make sure that we spend a minute to talk about the ways our system one categorization, in-group, out-group, is being manipulated overtly and implicitly. So maybe let's go there, because I feel like I'm like, oh, I'm so mad, because I know, the news people and certain, expert guests who are on there, and they're trying to, I'm just neutrally talking, but there are all sorts of political agenda goal states that we're being fed, I believe. What do you have to say about that?
So So to break it down, you mentioned like this the interdependence to make it real simple also is just like there's a combination of social situational factors and like things inside of me that like mix up and interact with each other to produce a behavior. So if I can manipulate some of the situational factors, especially if I know how they match up with some things inside of you, like categorization, like I can really supercharge our existing tendencies. And yes, I think it is manipulated. So, for instance, like one of the situational factors that's in this model is uncertainty, which is a major has a major impact on our behavior. Like when we feel uncertain, we work very hard to reduce that uncertainty through over a lot of different mechanisms. And one of the ways that people can do that is like let's like imagine, you know, somebody very close to you gets cancer and you have this overwhelming sense of like, why did it happen to such this person close to me? How could this have happened? Like there's this uncertainty that like you get thrown into and it's very uncomfortable. And so what you see is a lot of like the drive to reduce that uncertainty is helped when you can assign blame. And that's a system one categorization. That's a connecting the dots that may or may not exist.
Can we also say blame is meaning, even if it's like it feels like meaning, and
Yeah,
it's not like
meaning
blame? Yeah.
a share an enemy, like a goal to go against. Um, and so people can use this. So like I can say like, okay, I've already my default status is to categorize and derogate this group of this other. And now I can say to reduce their uncertainty, I can assign blame. So they're going to go from like, why is my world, why have things not turned out the way I wanted them to be? Why do I feel this sense of fear and I don't know how my world is changing? Somebody can reduce the uncertainty and take advantage of categorization to say this person, this group is the source of it. And people move from being anxious to being angry. And like, actually, what's ironic is that like the feeling of anger actually breeds more optimism than uncertainty because now I have a direction. Now I have a purpose and a subject of that anger. My uncertainty is reduced and I have a person who's, I can say is going to support me in, carrying this banner of that person's the problem. We're going to get rid of that person or reduce their power or you name it. Right. So that combination of like, it's a known set of ingredients that we come back to that I can direct it in a specific way, specifically to manipulate for the purpose of generating activism, voting, all these different things like that.
So break that down again. I really understand what you're saying, but break that down
Yeah.
again in terms of how is someone on the news talk evening program who's offering a perspective hitting us in ways that might manipulate our thinking?
Okay. So I'll start with sports and then
Okay,
I'll go
great.
into the news, right? So if you ever watch a sports show, there's the play-by person and then there's the color commentator. The color commentator is there to provide, some insights into the game, but they're also there to give your brain a story about what's happening in the moment. Oh, these guys, and you hear it all the time. You'll say, these guys were super motivated out of halftime. They must have had a great speech. All right. Oh, these guys did not come ready to play. They must have been tired from the day before. None of that may or may not be true, but we love it. Like we love them making the connection for us that eases our like, why is this thing happening? Why is this guy made four in a row? Or why has he missed three free throws? Whatever it is, they provide the story. So news tries to make that story feel complete in your head. Like they want you to pay attention. Like when you feel good, you watch more. So it's either I can like arouse your fear. I can either, like we pay more attention to things when we're scared of it, all these things like that. So there's all these different things designed to get you to watch more, listen more, click more.
Okay, so
And
that's the cycle
mhm.
of breeding uncertainty. There's danger, there's threat, and now I'm going to give you a story that's the outraged story that makes you feel better because at least you're fucking mad. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it literally you are rewarded with dopamine every time that connection is made. Just like solving a crossword puzzle or any other thing like that, it's the same hit of dopamine that like you're like, yes, that's the connection. That's the story. Thank you. So, and then you can see that like that's both on the news media side, but also on the, political side, where if I can like create that story for you, the reason why you're in the situation you're in, the reason why you haven't been as successful in life is because of them,
Yeah.
because of this other.
Yeah.
And I can now have an actor to blame.
The immigrants or the illegal
The
immigrants
current
are
example
the,
of the day.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. So how do I as an individual, because we're about
Yeah.
individuals, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How does any individual work with this awareness that, like, oh, I could be caught in this cycle of distress, uncertainty, answer, story narrative that is actually making me more isolated and building a more siloed, segregated perspective. How do I deal with that? Yeah.
I think it comes back to like, where do we want to allocate our effort? You know, we have to see that this is a situation that I'm being rewarded, and system one is just overjoyed with this story. And I have to say, hey, it could be that the cancer was random, you know?
Mhm, mhm.
It could be that some of the reasons I'm in my situation have to do with choices that I've made. Now, these are all like levels of like awareness that system one doesn't want that story, but
Yeah.
system two has the ability to step in and the ability to have that level of awareness of like, okay, I'm not going to use these dissonance reducing techniques. I'm not going to change the deal. I'm not going to move the goalpost. I'm not going to blame. When you feel yourself doing that, I think it's like I wish I could say something besides like it's about self-awareness.
Yeah, that's
It,
fine.
it and it's about recognition of this is what's happening inside of me,
Mhm.
and like I'm going to take back the control to say I feel this tendency that's never going to go away, but I do have a different way. I do have the power to make decisions, not just using that one impulse. I can consider multiple pieces of information if I allocate a little bit of mental effort. If I draw into system two and I'm making these really important decisions about who I vote for, what organizations I support, where I spend my time, like those are decisions that require not just system one. It's really that effort, but we have to like step back, recognize how the decisions are being made by default to be able to say, this is the time to bring in a little bit of extra effort.
Beautiful. So education, self-awareness, emotional intelligence,
Yes.
individualism are all ways out of the confining social problems of system one approach to living.
Yeah. Well, one of the things also, and I'd shared with you this other assignment that I'd given my students, which is like they have to have, a productive conversation podcast is what I call that. So they have a conversation with somebody about a topic they fundamentally disagree with, something that causes distance, causes tension. And I have students, like when I introduce this, that you see their facial reactions being like, oh, I do not want to do this, right? And what I hear them say afterwards, when they actually get curious and try to understand where people are coming from, what they find is they're like, I really get why they believe what they believe. Like, I can't group this person as a non thinking, unintentional, just, willy nilly making their decisions. Like, they have very specific reasons that I may disagree with, and that's fine, but we've connected on having an underlying path to get to where they believe. And I think you start seeing people more. Hear my students all the time say they wrestle with the idea that somebody that has such a different perspective, they understand the perspective. They may not agree with it. That's not the requirement. And I think that connects them to the other person instead of being this like cartoon character of, somebody how could you be so ridiculous that you believe this? They're like, I get it. And I connect with you as a human trying the best to figure out your world rather than you are your belief in this one area and that's all you are.
Mhm. Which is another form of dehumanization.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well said.
Yeah.
So self-awareness and individualism and really working through the default systems. Is
Yeah.
there a way that you celebrate system one energy in your life? I'm a deep advocate of making peace with our nature.
Hmm.
And I and
Hmm.
I and I and I wouldn't want someone to walk away from my show feeling like I'm down on system one. So
So
just to make sure,
intuition,
yeah, yeah, tell me, yeah.
I think intuition often, like, they've done all kinds of experiments where they like, if you're like pulling cards from a deck, right? And imagine there's like certain cards that have, you know, this negative consequence for you. Before you can actually communicate what the pattern is, system one already starts making you stop choosing the wrong card. And I think that like it's very good at pattern recognition, for which in our life is a very good thing, and it recognizes it before our system two side comes in. And so seeing that there are connections
Mm.
that it makes that are incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
It just overdoes it sometimes, right? Like it
Yeah.
overdoes that connection
Yeah.
and it sees connection where it doesn't exist. And so that's where system two steps step in. But at no point, like the ability to have that intuition and pick those things up faster about humans, about tendencies, about connection is incredibly important. And I would never want that to not be a thing, nor would I want to have to think about all my decisions in the entire day. Like there's an efficiency, need that like classic overthinkers, this is like the definition of anxiety, right? It's like overthinking these decisions. So like system one is protecting you from that on a daily
Yeah.
basis. And we should all say thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sing its praises. I feel it. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. It's good. It's I think celebrating the instincts and the intuition is beautiful. I want to invite you to share a little bit more about your story. I
Yeah.
so much appreciate, Ryan, your clarity here, your clarity of mind, your understanding of concepts, breaking them down, recognizing the dynamics that we are living in. And I love
Yeah.
that part of people who spend their lives looking at our sociality with science in mind. And so, what brought you into this path that you're on?
Well, what I like to tell my social psychology students on the first day of class is when I introduce them, I say, well, you get the pleasure of being taught by a social psychology reject. Which always is, they kind of like, they give me a second, because, I was a psych major in undergrad, and I got into teaching. I thought I was going to go into counseling. And I ended up finding that I started teaching. I did way more counseling as a teacher than most of the counselors in the school did, because you have that really strong relationship and people trust you and they bring your stories to you. Um, so then I wanted to then apply for a PhD in social psychology. And so I applied to out in your area. I applied to Stanford as my only school, and I was super excited about going there, not realizing, or maybe taking account that is the number one school and they accept three people a year and it's very hard. But I just felt, I was like, I can do this, and so I didn't get in. And I asked for some feedback about, hey, like how could I strengthen my application, and they were the feedback. I had a very professor I'd been working with ahead of time and during the time, and he said, everything you write about is education. Every sphere of influence you want to make an impact on is in education. It's like you will get what you're doing in social psychology, because you have an interest in the topic, but I really would encourage you to go into education policy, because that's where you can make change to the situations, to schools. So I was bummed because I just love, the topic. But I took the advice, and that's when I came and did my doctorate in education policy. But then, so I was doing my doctorate, worked in schools. I worked in Baltimore City schools, doing teacher evaluation and principal evaluation systems for the district, which is all setting up the right incentives and scenarios and things like that. It's using all these things, but applied to education. So it was the work I wanted to do. We came back to Nashville, and I went to the psych department. I was like, hey, I really love teaching. I love psychology. Like, do you have any classes you need? And they're like, no, we don't have anything yet. And I was like, all right, cool. So I went back a year later and I was like, hey, what about now? I'm still here. Just let me know. And they were like, actually, we need a class. Can you come in? And they were like, can you teach our social psychology class? I was like, you're kidding me. Yes, I will. Of course, I will do this, right? And and that was 10 years ago, and I've been teaching it since. And then now I've made this move. Just coming up this next year, I'll move full time from education policy, ironically, over to psychology department, but still do a lot of my work in education. So I still work with education organizations on like a consulting level and in the business world to still impact schools. But now I get to like play around and talk about psychology full time all day, and I am thrilled. So
Love hearing that. I have more questions about education
yeah,
and the impact of it. And I can see that, in a certain way, education policy is the goal directed side of the social psychology knowledge, that it's a place where we can establish an effect and have impact.
yeah. If you can set up the right situations and like, there's this idea of like nudge or setting up the default situation in schools where you can set the situation to increase the likelihood of certain like pro-social beneficial acts for students, for teachers, and so forth. And
Yeah.
that it is. So it's applying all of that to like making the path, shaping the path, and making that a little bit of an easier walk for people to go down to make beneficial choices.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think you've done an amazing job advocating and showing that possibility. And I feel like maybe the most intrinsic motivation about it all is the state of when I am in self-awareness and I live from self-awareness, or I choose social behaviors from a place of self-awareness, that somehow is more rewarding
Mm,
than defensive approaches to life.
I think long term. And I think that's part of the issue of why it's hard to make that transition is because in the short term, self-awareness, like there's something called like the psychological immune system, in which like I have these defense mechanisms and to make myself feel better. And actually like sometimes like not, using these defense mechanisms is like a sign of depression. Like it's one of the diagnostic elements of like depression is that you're just saying it's all my fault. I'm a bad person and you're not using these. So there's a balance of I'm using these. I'm not a terrible person. And so there's short term, I would say some negative consequences to like how you feel about yourself because increasing your awareness is not always pleasant. Um,
Right. Yeah.
but long term, if you, it's like about either I'm going to go down the path of saying like this is who I am and this is what I believe and that's okay and I'm accepting of that self.
Yeah.
And if there's something I don't like, then I'm going to do something about it, or I'm going to say this is who I am and I'm gaining that comfort, but I don't think it's immediate. I think it's that longer process of acceptance and like changing the things you want to change to get there.
Mm. Mm. I have thought here. I'm gonna put
Yeah.
it out. And my experience is that I'm more reassured knowing I'm in the discomfort, the right
Yes.
discomfort, than the defensive discomfort. And that feels better than the reactive unconsciousness of system one.
Now it does for you,
Yes.
but you've probably sat with that. It probably didn't happen immediately.
No, not at first. No, I think it's part of growing up.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that's where people sometimes get stuck.
Yes.
Is that I'd call that a hurdle that you have to get over. And I think long term, I'm 100% on board. The level of self awareness that you have, the positive changes you can make to your life to make it better can happen once you've crossed that hurdle. But that
Yeah.
it hurts to initially try to,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you have to take a dip. And like,
Yeah.
I think it's a roadblock to
Yeah.
getting where you're talking about. But long term, I'm 100% on
Okay,
board
this
that
is
it is better.
beautiful. This is great. I love that you said this because it brings an enormous amount of compassion or maybe empathy that if when I get caught out in an external political argument, what I might actually be doing is hurting someone who's struggling with a hurdle of self-awareness.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It's funny. There's an image that I sometimes give to my students too, that when somebody gets a counteracting idea and it shows up on a brain scan the same way as somebody attacking you with a knife. And so like it literally is a perceived physical threat, it feels like. So like I find that image to be helpful for people to say like when you're presenting these new ideas, when you're forcing a change to their identity or understanding of the world, it is perceived. I want you to be thinking about you running at them with like a knife, right? And like give that grace and compassion to allow for a safer place to be able to move, and like a sense of like understanding of the emotional difficulties that they're experiencing, and not try to like push further and shove the knife further, you know? So
Yeah. That's beautiful. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you so much, Ryan Balch. Thank you so much for being on the show today. This was a really much to my I wasn't sure what was here, but I'm so glad we took the time and you shepherded me through this amazing territory of social cohesion and social psychology. Thank you.
no, I appreciate it so much. And I love your ability to both connect with the things in your world and just, put the through line between all the different pieces of the story that we've been telling. So I really appreciate your navigation of that.